Today's scripture reading comes from the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, verses 25 through 32, and chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. I will be reading from the New Revised Standard Version Bible. Please listen for these holy words. So then, putting away falsehood, let all of us speak the truth to our neighbors, for we are members of one another. Be angry, but do not sin, and do not let the sun go down on your anger. And do not make room for the devil. Thieves must give up stealing. Rather, let them labor and work honestly with their own hands, so as to have something to share with the needy. Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building up, as there is need, so that your words may give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with which you were marked with a seal for the day of redemption. Put away from you all bitterness and wrath and anger and wrangling and slander, together with all malice. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ has forgiven you. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and live in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. A holy reading for the people of God.
Thank you so much, James, for reading that this morning, and I'm actually going to grab your copy as I walk up here. So last week, we started a sermon called Love Your Enemies, and truly, I had another sermon for this Sunday to end this sermon series called The Upside Down Kingdom, and the sermon that I was going to preach today is Redefining Greatness, and the talk about the least really shall be the greatest of all, and that servanthood is really truly the way in God's kingdom to be known as the greatest of all. And that's quite an important message. I also think it's a message that this church does really well. And so I through prayer and through having a deep conversation with Andy, decided to take one more week for this topic that seemed to have hit pretty well with us. And so to give it a little bit more airspace and a little bit more time. I also recognize that in talking about loving our enemies, there is a lot that comes from who we are when we approach the topics of forgiveness and justice. I think forgiveness and justice is very much embodied as human beings in our experience, in who we've been raised to be, in who we actually physically are. I think we all approach it at different spots, and I wanted to make sure that you were not just hearing from me, a middle-class, 40-year-old, white, cisgendered female, but that we opened up the idea of how do all people come to the idea of justice, forgiveness, and grace. I think there's a lot to kind of upend there and to get into. And so Andy and I had a really good discussion looking at a specific case of forgiveness and grace. Can y'all hear me? Okay. I feel like I'm a little bit hot. Okay, yeah, if you can turn me down just slightly. I also am just a projector. But I wanted to get into this conversation because the one that Andy and I had while we were talking seemed to have a lot of fruit to it. And I hope that it will be fruitful for you this morning to have more than just one person's opinion on how easy or how hard it is to forgive and to get to the moment of grace. So this morning as we open up, I wanted to first, I'm going to give Andy the opportunity to answer the first question.
No.
Yep. So Andy, when we talk about forgiveness, it's, I believe, one of the hardest things that we're called to as Christians. I think in so many ways we can get servanthood it also calls a lot of us, but we can get it down pretty well. We can get down maybe loving one another, but this idea of forgiveness, loving when we have been wronged, seems to be really hard as human beings. So how do you process the idea of forgiveness? And are there any specific life experiences that have shaped how you approach forgiveness? just an easy question to start with.
Right. I think about forgiveness as another thing on this, I believe, very long list of radical things that Jesus asks of us. And I was talking about this in my New Testament class when we were discussing Matthew's depiction of what happened with the new converts on the boat with him, and the storm comes. And this was a place that they were passing through that was known for killing people. Like the storm would be raging so that most boats would drown passing through this area. And so, of course, the people on the boat are experiencing, they're terrified, they're angry because this man who has asked us to follow him is asleep.
Yeah.
And then when they go and wake Jesus up, it seems as though he has an attitude.
Yeah.
Right? And so that whole thing of their faith being brought up is what that chapter is about and what we talk about. And the questioning of that faith, like, do you not believe? And I'm like, Jesus, please don't ask me that. Don't ask me about my faith when I have clearly come to you. I have clearly left my people and my things, and I followed you. And it just seems that Jesus asks us to be so extreme and so radical all the time. So I categorize forgiveness pretty much in that same way. Someone has hurt you. Someone has offended you. Someone has stepped out of their place with you. And you are supposed to be gracious and kind, and in a way, like, let them off the hook. And as the person who's been offended multiple times and hurt countless times, as many of you have been, I think the last thing that you're thinking about is letting somebody off the hook. As a matter of fact, many times, that last thing is the straw that has broken the camel's back. And a lot of times our reaction in the moment where we've been hurt or offended is from years of letting it go. And so I look at forgiveness as something radical, but I also look at it as another thing that we are called to do, especially as believers, especially as people who lead others. We're called to be that example. And we do that through all these radical things, but especially forgiveness, I believe.
Yeah. I think what you're mentioning, so again, I've used this book several times through this series. This is by Russell Pragent, Converting Christians to the Jesus Ethic. And he has a chapter in here which is really interesting and talks to the idea of this part of the Sermon on the Mount, which again was last week's text, where it was, you've heard it said, eye for an eye, but I say, right? So Jesus is taking sort of this, what you see 3 times in the Old Testament, retributive justice. He's taking this idea of retributive justice and sort of turning it again upside down on its head and saying, eye for an eye works in making a system equal, in making a system just. But I say, if you are following me, I say total forgiveness. And this is just, I appreciate Russell's point on it, because he says, actually what Jesus is saying here is so out of line, because basically it says, Jesus asks victims of imperial oppression to do more than the oppressor requires. And so again, Jesus is almost asking those who have been hurt to now do what to me seems like the work of forgiveness, the work of now making it right, instead of the one who did the wrong to start with.
Right.
Which I immediately come to this and go, Jesus, you got it wrong. Why should they be doing the work of forgiveness? It should be the person who did it wrong. And this is what Russell says, and I appreciate this. What he says is he's taking what Jesus says and says, actually, it's so crazy what Jesus says that he's not saying it literally. He's actually using this as shock treatment, which I thought was an interesting way of putting it. He's using it as shock treatment so that the person can get unstuck in the muck and mire of their own pain and sort of like human want, okay, you hurt me, so I want to hurt you back. I want you to feel what it feels like to be in this. He's sort of getting us out of that with this shock treatment of now I should like wash your feet after you've done me wrong, to say, whoa, 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 Jesus, that's nuts.
Crazy.
That's crazy. But if I can get you out of just the wanting to get you back, then I can start the work of forgiveness in you that actually allows you the ability to seek the freedom that forgiveness gives to those who have been harmed, which is a wild ride. And it's I would say, a wild ride that so many of us don't take it. I think so many of us have seen an eye for an eye, and we're like, yeah, I mean, that's the only way, right? Is that you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back. But what happens is then we get stuck in this cycle, right? This cycle, I think retributive justice is a cycle. And I don't know that it ever breaks if we just keep saying, okay, eye for an eye, now tooth for a tooth, now hand for a hand. We're just all going to end up hurt, right? Incomplete. And so Jesus is saying, if you put a marker here and you stop and you consider, now how can we actually heal the brokenness? How can we actually get past the idea of hurting one another to get to a place where we could all be transformed towards love, hope, forgiveness, and peace? But, come on. Like, how do we do that in real life?
The stuck part, and that was the nature of our conversation on last Sunday, that I feel like is a good segue to talk about, this stuck part. And so in thinking about like forgiveness and why we should forgive, and I think about many times when someone has done something to you, and let me say this, I am working through my own issues with forgiveness even at this moment. There are specifically a couple of people that I am picturing right now, like I am working through, I'm in the process, in real life, in real time, of forgiving these people. And I noticed that this is something, of course, that, speaking of stuck, that will suck your time, right? I'm thinking about this thing that happened between these two people in my life was 2 years ago. And I am still thinking about this every single day. It doesn't occupy my entire day as it did when it first happened, but it is something that I think about at least once a day. So I'm in that process. And I believe that that stuckness that you were talking about just a minute ago is why God is calling us to forgive. Because as the one that has been offended, you're literally stuck in place every day thinking about the very thing that was done to you. And for some people, they're not able to move out of that very weird place. It takes your mental space. It keeps you from fully maximizing your day. Like, do I have a witness? It keeps you from maximizing your day. And I think essentially in the long term, you do not move into the things that God has for you if you're stuck in the place of ruminating over what has happened to you. And I think the many reasons we do that is because we're often looking at the person thinking, what are they going to do to make this right with me? Does that sound familiar? Like, is that like, what are they going to do? So we're stuck not only ruminating over this every day, but we're stuck looking at the person saying, what are you going to do to make this right? How are you going to, when is enough enough? And we get to judge when that is. So it keeps you stuck in a place where you cannot be busy with the things that God has for you.
Yeah, I thought about it again the other day, and I really think forgiveness is multi-layered. I think too many times we think of it as a switch, right? I'm either going to turn on the forgiveness switch or it's going to be off, and I'm going to decide at what point I'm going to get to the point of forgiveness, and then it's sort of like a one and done. Like, okay, now I'm going to choose forgiveness and it's all over. But That's not the way it's worked out in my life. When I've been seriously harmed or hurt, it's been layers of forgiveness. So I may be able to forgive the first instance or the first day and say, you know what, I'm going to choose peace today. I'm not going to burn their house down today. Right? I'm going to choose.
Catch me tomorrow.
I'm going to choose to live in that peace today. But then another part of the hurt, another part of the pain comes up to the surface a week later or a month later or a year later. And I have to again choose forgiveness. Right? I have to again say, no, I'm not going to let the pain rule today. I'm going to forgive again, and I'm going to forgive again, and I'm going to forgive again and again. I liken it sometimes to a conversation that I have with my daughter about marriage, right? It's an everyday commitment to the covenant. And I think just what you're saying about forgiveness is the same thing that I say about marriage, is we cannot expect another person to fully fulfill our love bucket in the way that only the God of the universe is able to do. Because I am madly in love with my husband. I think he is one of the greatest human beings that God has ever created. But he is not Jesus Christ.
Sorry, Jonathan.
And so if I am expecting him to love me in a way that heals every harm, every wound, everything that has ever happened to me and will happen to me, he is going to fail short. And yet, if I can remain deeply rooted in how loved I am by God, deeply rooted in a life of prayer, sustained by my belovedness in Jesus, then I approach the love that John and I have for one another with human expectations. And in that, he gets a gold star every single day, because he loves me in a way that I can be loved, and vice versa. And I think the same is true about forgiveness. There's no way that person can make it right. There's no way they can make it right, because when we have harmed each other to the soul, to the core, only God can heal that. And I think part of forgiveness that we don't always talk about is it takes faith. Choosing forgiveness is choosing to leave room to say, I'm going to take my personal vengeance out of this, and I'm going to let God handle the rest. And I'm going to trust that God is going to handle the rest of the act of forgiveness. I'm going to take my expectations out of it and expect that God is going to use transformational grace in that person's life, and God is going to heal me. And I'm going to put my faith in that instead of what I can do to fix that person. Amen?
Amen. I want to ask you a question, because you brought up Jonathan, the second Savior, not the first, not Jesus Christ, the second Savior. You brought up Jonathan. Is there a difference, though, in the way you handle personal hurts, like with family, versus how you would handle them with someone else? Because someone would say, like, as it relates to family, that they might be a little easier to forgive because of that love there, or it might be harder, I'm not sure, but how do you handle the difference between hurt that is experienced by those closest to you than by community?
So I have a head shaking in the back, but I do think that it is easier. And I'm not to say it's easy. Anybody here who's ever been in a deeply committed relationship with another human being and they have hurt you, it is not easy to seek forgiveness. But I have a desire to seek forgiveness because I have a relationship that I deeply want to keep, right? And so my yearning to find forgiveness in that relationship, I feel like is very present. And if the harm has been done directly to me, then forgiveness really does feel like it's my choice, right? And part of the catalyst is my work to forgive, to let myself be freed up from disappointment, from grace, to be able to love freely again, and that we can work on that together. I think when I've experienced sort of injustices that move past me, so I'll speak of one to be particular and to put it into context. I grew up in a church that did not affirm my call. We've talked about this before. So much so that when I went to seminary and I was supposed to take my application to Duke to my senior pastor to get them to sign it, and then there was sort of an invitation for your church to allow you to speak, to thank the congregation for all they've done in your life that have brought you to this point of then answering the call to seminary, and to sort of, they're actually supposed to take a love offering to then sort of send you off with a little bit of love offering and financial support to seminary. It's this beautiful sort of thing that Duke does. Well, my senior pastor absolutely refused to even sign my application to Duke, and then definitely didn't let me talk to anybody, and then there was no love offering. And immediately that really hurt. And it really caused me to go, am I in the wrong here? Like, am I doing something wrong? I feel like I'm answering the call on my life, but then I just don't know. I mean, the church that I grew up in did not believe that women can follow a call towards ordination and can serve in the church. And for a long time, I held on to that pain as a deep injustice. And a long time that drove me in ways that were both helpful and in ways that were really not helpful. Yeah. Until I had to finally come to a point where, at first, I recognized that the people of the church that I grew up in did not outwardly try to harm me. They were birthed and they were raised in just a different theology, right? And they were trying to love me the best way that they knew how to love me. So I had an opportunity to forgive those that brought me up. And then I had an opportunity to forgive the denomination that I was brought up in. But that to me was harder, because I wanted to forgive the denomination that harmed me and yet still hold their feet to the fire to say this theology is harmful to young girls growing up in your church. It is harmful to young girls who are growing up in your church, who are hearing a call from the Holy Spirit on their lives. And so there's a tension there to say, I'm not going to hold on to the personal harm, but also I don't just let the church off the hook, I think was a way that you put it a minute ago, for not seeking transformation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the real tension, right, that we have to hold, is how do we seek forgiveness, but also hold up the fight for justice? And so that's my next question for you, is justice and mercy are both central to our faith, but they seem to pull us in different directions. How do you reconcile the desire for justice with the call to show mercy and forgiveness?
So I am one who believes that certain actions have consequences. I grew up in a household where my father especially was very protective of my brother and I. And I really didn't understand that growing up. Living in the context of 9/11 and all that we see as far as race relations in this country, that upbringing has prepared me for that. And in some ways, when we're talking about forgiveness, there were some things that I was holding very close to my heart as it relates to the way that my father raised me, that I really couldn't resolve because he passed away when I was 16. And so there was like this need to kind of understand the why. And then I started growing up, and they say, of course, as you grow up, if you're lucky, wisdom comes with that maturity. And so I saw the fear, I understood the fear that he had for two black boys, one who was always larger than everybody else, and that's me, of course. My brother he grew like everybody else, but I was the one that stuck out. And it was about protecting us from a society that would always target us. And so I preface that by saying, we grew up understanding about rules, as he would say, rules and regulations. If you didn't do this and you were supposed to, then this is what happened, right? And so I kind of have grown up always wanting to be compliant because I wanted to be on the right side of right. And so I kind of had this, I kind of live with, and it's softening, but this rigidity with, if you do something wrong, you should be punished for it. And not only that, I want to see the punishment. I want to see it, right? Kind of what I was just talking about in the previous question. I want to see it. I want to be a part of it, actually. I want to, and not in a, not in a creepy way. I just want to see you come to terms with what you've done, right? And that's really hard, especially when we live in a society where just because you follow the rules, you do all the right things, you try to live a holy and righteous existence, it doesn't mean that all good things happen to you. That doesn't mean that you get shielded from the realities and from the vicissitudes of life. And it doesn't mean that people who are bad and do evil things, that they get punished for them, as we have seen in various ways. And so that is something that I think I will always deal with. How do you live as you are called to live and be always forgiving, always understanding, but also understanding that there is a law of the land, and that law oftentimes says that when you do something that infringes upon the rights and liberties of others, that there is a cost. And I think the only thing that keeps me thinking that this retributive justice is in many ways pointless and it doesn't help anything is to put myself in the shoes of the oppressor. Who at some point does feel bad about what they did. Now, all of this, like you're having to imagine this, you're having to play this role with yourself. But ideally, if you think about it, just like I'm praying to eventually fully forgive that which was done to me by these people who I still love, there is somebody that is praying to God about me and what I did to them that I have perhaps not apologized for, that perhaps I don't even know that I did that to them. But there's somebody praying about what I might have done to them. And that keeps me, in many ways, always being humble, thinking about my actions, and in many ways, it has transformed me because there is, I think, a sorrow that I have not knowing who that person might be or knowing who that is that I might have offended because of something stupid that I did. So I think that is how I deal with that, is that I would want complete forgiveness for myself for something that I had done to someone else.
I think that's beautiful, right? I mean, I think this idea of we could go so much further if we would just ask ourselves, what if I was in their shoes, right? No matter what the situation, I think we could go so much further to say, but what if I wasn't in my shoes, but I was in their shoes? I think a couple of points on what you just said. I think the first of which is important to point out is that in this text, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is not trying to transform Pax Romana, right? Jesus isn't saying, right, I want the justice system to let people off, right? He's saying you, right? You've heard it said, but I'm calling you to this other way of living life, which means he's not, this is the tricky part about Jesus, right? Is like, again, he's giving us this way of doing it, but he's not saying that that's the way that the whole world works. I think he's saying eye for an eye is the way that the world works, and yet calling people to the kingdom of heaven means that it looks a little bit different and it calls more from us first. I think that's important. I think the second thing is the tension that we feel so much is because this idea of forgiveness, this I appreciated the word you used when we started, radical forgiveness, that is almost hard to believe, can only be done in a human's heart that has a soul. And I think too many times we are looking at systems and expecting them to understand forgiveness, mercy, justice, and truth. And they don't have a soul that can be transformed. Systems are soulless. And so when we're talking about these overarching injustices, we have to be fair in our approach. Yes, we are called as followers of Jesus to radical forgiveness and relentless love. And we live in systems that are just broken. And so we can fight injustice on larger levels, but we have to be really, I think, patient and maybe in some ways looking outside of those systems to seek the ultimate unveiling of the kingdom coming. I don't think that Jesus ever told his disciples, look to Rome for the kingdom of heaven. It's the thing that's transforming, and one day you'll see it. And yet I think too many times we're doing that same thing. We're looking to the system to give us our salvation, when in fact it's going to be these personal relationships of trying our human best to be radical with forgiveness and love.
But I have a question for that, and that is, can true forgiveness actually happen if justice hasn't been served? Oh no, you've got to give us some answers because I need to know.
I think that's the question that put us in this hot seat today, right? That is the point of tension in which we live. And that is the point of tension, in which Jesus went to the cross with it. In so many ways, I don't know about you, but if I'm being honest, I vehemently scream at the gospel sometimes. Jesus, if you would have just fought and survived, you could have given us so much more answers. You could have helped us out so much more. Why did you give up? Why did you forgive? Why did you look and say, God, forgive them for they know not what they're doing? They know what they're doing.
They know exactly what they're doing.
They know exactly what they're doing. Yeah. And they're the problem.
See? Yeah. Yeah.
So many times I look at Jesus and I'm like, get up and fight. And then I have to fall to my knees and say, maybe Jesus knows better than I do.
Yeah.
Maybe Jesus knows better than I do. And while I want to say no, fight with every breath of your being until we see justice in this world, I also say I don't think we ever see justice in this world until each and every one of us knows how to relentlessly love one another and seek forgiveness above all else, putting ourselves in the shoes of our own oppressors. To say, I seek the opportunity for them to be transformed as much as I pray that those whom I have harmed allow me the opportunity for transformation. I mean, that is radical grace. And I, just as we close up this morning, and I'm going to let you have the final word, so just prepare yourself. Why am I emotional? Somebody posted something this morning that took me back to a really bad place. I recognize that there is a arm of Christianity that is really evil and is causing a lot of harm. And this morning I reacted in my not forgiven self. This morning I reacted and was like, what? Stop. You are harming people. Do you even recognize what you're doing? And then I came to this place of recognizing that this morning, I just want you to hear this. I told somebody, I said, I feel like I'm going this morning to preach to the choir. I think that you are some of the most forgiving and beautifully loving people that I've ever met in my life. And I recognize that we're having a hard conversation this morning, and wherever it landed on you, I hope that it ruminates in you. I hope that it bursts new seeds in you, that whatever is happening in you, my prayer is with you. I also recognize that it feels so unfair that the choir is being asked, maybe this is uniquely funny that you're sitting here, that the choir is being asked again to carry worship. That the choir is being asked again to lead the way, to usher in the kingdom, to usher in the presence of Jesus in our world. And yet, if the choir doesn't lead us, then who's going to show up? So my hope is, church, is that I get it. This message of radical forgiveness and seeking mercy, we can look to others and say, they're the ones that need to hear it. But they're never going to hear it unless they see Jesus on the cross crucified on behalf of them. And we show them that by the way that we love and show grace and mercy, truth, forgiveness, and hope.
Yeah.
And you close us out.
Let me preface this by saying, please know that I am being guided by the Holy Spirit in saying this. And this may be a trigger warning for you, but it is very much what I am being led to say. Part of our conversation about forgiveness included the story of Botham Jean. And if you remember Botham Jean, he was murdered in his apartment by a Dallas police officer about 2 miles from where I live now. And I was living in Oklahoma City at the time. And this had been the next person in a list of African-American men who had been killed by the police. And while those cases were equally brutal, surrounding them was the inquiry in the lives of these people, and the system's ability to point at imperfections with all of their lives. But Botham Jean was different. He was he worked in finance for PricewaterhouseCoopers. He was a worship leader at his church. He had very close relationships with his married parents. He had good relationships with his siblings. He had never been in trouble with the law. And he was literally in his apartment. That case drove me mad because much of his life reminded me of my own life. Out of all the people, he was me. And so I became obsessive in wanting to know every part of this particular story. And if you remember, there was a lot of pressure from the African American community for someone to highlight the almost perfectionistic aspects of this person's life And he was in the moment kind of like our Rosa Parks, somebody without stain. How could this happen to this young man? And if you remember, nobody was really saying anything. At least that's how it felt like to me. And of course, it all goes to trial. And Amber Geiger, the police officer who killed him, was sentenced, of course. But there is something that happens at the trial. The brother of Botham Jean asked the judge, could he give her a hug, Amber Geiger? And he lamented, of course, about his brother, but he stated that he forgave her. And this hug was the demonstrative thing that kind of sealed and illustrated that forgiveness. And I remember nearly kicking my television over because I was so mad. I so wanted justice for this family, for this mom who made it very clear that her stance was, this was wrong, this has happened to my child. Forgiveness is not necessarily on the table for me. And mothers out there, mothers and fathers alike, know that. You touch my kid, you touch me, basically, you know. But this act of forgiveness from this brother really affected me for a very long time. And it was probably up until last year where it resolved in my soul that this brother did the right thing. And I say that still having all the reservation in the world, all the things that this case was intertwined with, the fact that we need to really look at our justice system, the fact that we do need to look at how police are trained and how they interact with people, the fact that we need to really think about our safety as homeowners, and I mean all of these things like that this case really brought about. But I call myself Christian, and I serve a God who wants out of me not radical justice, but he's asking me to radically love, to radically serve, to radically give. And if he's going to ask for all three of those, he might as well add another one onto this list of things. And he asked me to radically forgive. And so in that moment, we see what radical forgiveness looks like. And lastly, it's not necessarily about Amber Geiger serving her final years in prison. It is about submitting to the transformation, submitting to God the transformation that will happen between he and her as it relates to forgiveness, that which we don't have any control over. I think that is the essence of forgiveness. It is about submitting to God and letting him manage the transformation that has to happen between the oppressor and essentially the person that they have hurt.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. That was the catalyst of our conversation, and I've had many this week with other African-American leaders in our conference that were a part of A Walk for Justice at the time and sort of their reflections. Amber Geiger is up for parole on the 29th of this month, and so I know that this story will be back in the news circuit within the next couple of weeks, and so we were reflecting on a lot of people believe that the brother's act of forgiveness may play a role in her parole, and so I was asking this, like, how do we feel? Can we hold both, allow the brother to forgive her and allow him to have that grace, that freedom, and then also hold the accountability in our system that it should be the same for everybody, right? And that we should hold people accountable for what they do. And so all of this, as we close up, is really, 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 really hard. And it is really, really, really difficult. And yet, as Andy so beautifully put, it is the call of our lives. It is the constant call of our lives. And so my hope is we will constantly not come at these with an easy answer, but we will constantly come at these searching for what is going to draw me closer to the heart of Christ. What is going to draw me closer to the heart of Christ as I walk through this really hard and painful situation in our own lives and then in the world that we all live in together. I want to close with this prayer. It's called the Prayer of Strength, Love, and Pursuit of Justice by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you'll bow your heads and pray with me. O God of justice and mercy, we come to you with hearts heavy with the pain of the world. You call us to love even when it's hard, to forgive even when it hurts, to seek justice even when it seems out of reach. We confess that sometimes we do not want to forgive. The wounds we carry feel too deep, and the cries for justice echo too loudly in our souls. Help us, O Lord, to hold the tension between forgiveness and justice. Give us the strength to love those who have hurt us, not because we forget the wrong that they have done, but because we believe in the power of your grace to transform even the hardest of hearts. Teach us, O God, that forgiving does not mean accepting injustice. Help us to fight for justice in ways that heal and in ways that do not cause harm. Give us the courage to stand firm in truth while also extending mercy, knowing that both are needed in your kingdom. God, it is in this prayer that we pray as the people of God. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Let's close with a song. Thank you so much.
This is good.